Good morning, viewers. Welcome to the AU Talks on the AU TV. My name is Felicia Kwagbeji, and I'm your host for today's show. Today, we'll be looking at the issue of drug use among Africa's youth bulge. According to the World Health Organization's Regional Office for Africa, at least 15.3 million people have drug use disorders. I'm joined in the studio by Mr. Fred Awa, who is a lecturer at the University of Professional Studies, Accra, and the immediate past Secretary General of the All African Students Union. Welcome to the studio, Mr.
Thank you, Felicia.
It's been quite a long time.
Absolutely.
I think the last time I interviewed you was in 2015 at Rwanda, I think so.
Kigali, that is true.
Yes.
Korevip.
Yes, exactly. Nice to host you again.
Nice meeting you again.
Okay, so just to move on to today's discussion, we are looking at drug use among Africa's youth.
Okay.
I think there's been quite a lot of statistics indicating that this is quite a phenomenon on the increase. A lot of youth are using drugs. But just to put all of us on the same page so that we all know which drug we are referring to here, can you please tell us what we mean by drugs in this context?
Well, the definition of drug is broad and it comes from diverse perspectives.
Okay.
But for the purposes of this discussion, I want to stick to the definition by the World Commission on Drug Policies.
Okay.
They define drugs as psychoactive substances that are illegal. Now, when we say psychoactive, it means things that influence the state of the mind.
Okay.
All right? So in your country, Ghana, you can think about issues of Indian hemp, which is popularly called weed. You can talk about cocaine.
Okay.
You can talk about the new kid on the block that is tramadol.
Okay.
You can talk about heroin.
Okay.
And a variety of others that both the old and the young use that alters the state of their mind and as such has influences on their behavior towards society.
Okay. So why are youth using drugs? What do they use the drugs for?
Well, an array of reasons.
Okay.
Well, I think that in our settings, African settings, a number of factors account for the use of drugs. One of the key that we have identified is the issue of unemployment. All right?
Okay.
Yes. Drugs actually, students and youth actually get into drugs sometimes because they do not have jobs.
But why does you not having a job influences you to take drugs?
Averagely, my sister, you have a job, you are seated here, you are not idle. Okay, I do have a job, I am seated here, I'm not idle.
Exactly.
But if you get out of the university and down the lane you do not get a job, and then there's a friend or a colleague that can offer you a drink or two, you do it over a time, then you get addicted. So that is one of the key issues that we have identified as being the cause of drug abuse amongst the youth. Take, for instance, your country, Ghana.
Okay.
It is estimated that only 10% of the graduates that are churned out of our universities get employment within a year, meaning that the 90% are idle. And there are tendencies that they'll get into drugs because the devil finds work for an idle what? Hand. This in figures translates to 70,000 a year students get out of school, and less than 7,000 get employment in the formal sector. Okay. So you can think of over 60,000 persons without jobs. So tendencies are that they'll get into what?
Into things like that.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't really see the logic because taking drugs will not necessarily give you a job.
Yes. That is an argument that a lot of people have said over time, but reality is that when persons are involved in working, they do not have idle time to go in for.
Like okay. Yeah. So you've identified unemployment as one of the causes. Which other things? Unemployment.
The second is peer pressure.
Okay.
All right? Especially within institutions of higher learning where you have a bulge of the youth. A person feels isolated or does not feel belonged when he doesn't do a thing that is common with many. Are you getting it?
Yes.
So tendencies are that they get involved in what? Using the drugs that are available just because their colleagues are into it. The third is experimentation.
Okay.
All right. I have heard that tramadol gives you a certain feeling. Indian hemp gives you a certain feeling. You've read it in books, you've been told how, but the best way you can really feel how a thing works is experiencing it.
Okay.
So young people are adventurous, and sometimes they want to what? Experiment. And that is why our young people get into drugs. And then the fourth is availability.
Of what?
Of drugs.
Okay.
Yeah, in other jurisdictions, it's not easy to find drugs. But here in Ghana and in many parts of Africa, Indian hemp is as available as food.
And even how about the pharmaceutical ones, like the tramadol you spoke about?
Yes.
Because that is supposed to be more regulated in terms of who accesses it, whether through prescription or not. How come they are able to access
Now, the issue of tramadol is a little dicey.
Okay.
Now, much as it is prescribed, it is supposed to be consumed in a certain manner. But an overdose of it also has an effect that is attractive to the users. All right? So much as, take for instance, the first report we heard of in the Upper West region.
Yeah.
That was somewhere in 2017. It was reported by the Ghana News Agency. It was not as if students could not, in Ghana, when you get into a chemical shop, not a pharmacy, you can buy any drug that you want, including paracetamol. Okay?
But some drugs are supposed to be prescription
prescribed.
drugs. Yes.
Absolutely. But indeed, for some reason, apart from pharmacy shops, in Ghana, chemical shops, which we call drug shops, also sell what? Tramadol. That apart, our neighbors from Niger, the young men who go around, we call them Abochi boys. They have them peeled and then tied, and they sell them for a cedi. And mostly they go into trench areas, the ghettos, and then they sell them. So you don't even need to go to what? The pharmacy. They know where you are and they will bring it to you.
Okay.
And usually they'll sell it to persons who are doing very hard work. People who are doing construction, people who carry loads, kaya you.
Okay.
Are you getting it?
Yes.
So all of these are issues that we need to consider in our quest to fight the drug menace in Africa.
Do you personally know any drug addict, or have you spoken to any drug addict?
Well, indeed, having led, I'm a career student leader.
Okay.
Yeah, I've led students for not less than 10 years.
Okay.
So I've known classmates, I have known colleagues, I have known people, I've known an array of persons who have had drugs
Some
influencing their lives in one way or the other. People who have not been able to get out of school because of drug abuse. People who had lost their jobs because of drug abuse and all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was coming to ask you that from these experiences, what have been some of those negative impacts on these people due to their usage of drugs?
Well,
which you already started mentioning some, by the way.
All right. Now, when you take drugs, the definition itself tells you it is psychoactive. It means it changes the frame of your what? Your mind. So there are tendencies to do a number of things that hitherto you wouldn't have done without what? Drugs. One of such is crime.
Okay.
All right? So you do not have intentions to rape a woman. Okay? But you are doped with Indian hemp or heroin or any other substance. Then you end up what? Raping.
Doing those
all
things.
right? When the substance gets off your mind or it clears from your system, you realize that you didn't intend doing this, but that is what has also, that's what has happened.
You've done.
Yeah. Another is a damage to the mind, mental ailments. Now, the Narcotic Control Board of Ghana, as of 2014, posited that over 70% of the inmates of our psychiatric hospitals are youth from junior and senior what? High schools.
Very young people.
Absolutely. So it tells you that the use of drugs has an effect on what? The mind.
But do people really start using drugs at that tender age of 15, of 16?
Yes, of course, yes. Now, you see, I was in Nigeria in March for a presentation on this same topic, drug abuse. I was speaking from the perspective of Ghana. It was commissioned by the World Commission on Drug Policies. And then a young person of about 10 was in the program, the young man said that it was a debate amongst their group. Says drug abuse begins even from our homes.
How?
Your mom brings medicine that you are supposed to take, paracetamol. You're supposed to take 2 in the morning, and he says, Akosia, take 4. It will let the pain go quick. Are you getting it?
Yeah.
So right from there, all our traditional homes, your grandmother sells akpeteshi, locally brewed gin or ogogro, says, my grandson, take a bait.
Or sometimes they actually send you to go and buy it.
All right. Your grandfather sits under the mango tree. He's chewing cola nuts. He hands to you a piece. Or tobacco. All right? He hands to you a piece, because there's always a relationship between the grandfather and the grandson, and the grandmother and the granddaughter. So some of these traits, you get them as early as what?
10
below
years
10.
Okay.
So you take them, and then the grandparents also do them, not knowing what they are training you towards. Then gradually you grow up, become an addict, and then it becomes a problem to the entire society.
But you were earlier telling us about the impact, where you spoke about drug causing people to do things that ordinarily they wouldn't have done.
Yes. So we looked at the issue of crime. We looked at the issue, the impact it gives on the mind. That is mental derangement. Sometimes academic performance. All right. So people sometimes think that when you do drugs, there are tendencies that you perform well. But statistics have proven that the damage that Indian hemp does to the brain is irreparable. Yes. So when you smoke Indian hemp and then it damages a portion of your brain, that cell cannot heal itself. It cannot be repaired again until you die. So
no medical intervention.
Absolutely. It can only calm you. All right. So until you die, you are going to have the consequences would be on you, and that would include not performing well in examination. Because if you do not do drug, and your mind is very focused, and I do drugs, and my mind is not stable, it's obvious that our performance levels will not be the same. Yes. So that is one other, apart from the issues of family pressures and bringing shame to your to your community.
All right. So just to move the discussion forward, let's look at another angle in all of this. Are there policies governing the use of drug by the youth in the various countries? Are there policies? Are there specific authorities who are in charge of ensuring that those policies are also implemented?
Yes, all over Africa, successive governments have made policies intended at curbing the issues of drug use in their countries. Yeah, indeed, I want to speak about Ghana because we are here. All right, the overarching framework for our drug laws in Ghana is the PNDC Law 236 that was carved in 1990. And that actually gave birth to the Narcotics Control Board, the body that regulates the drug use in Ghana. Sadly, these bodies that are supposed to regulate the use of drugs in Africa mostly have punitive rather than curative measures. Meaning that at all times, their intentions is to punish the victims, rather than looking at alternative ways of
even preventing it.
And then resolving the issue. But I think there should be a paradigm. There should be a paradigm because the use of drug is not necessarily a criminal issue. It should be seen more as a health issue.
Is that correct?
Absolutely, because for instance, if I do Indian hemp, it is substance abuse, and it is addictive. Are you getting it? So if I do it today, by the end of tomorrow, when it gets out of my system, my blood would be calling for it. My system would be calling for it. So I need treatment, not punishment. But this is what our law says. When you are possessed with Indian hemp, 10 years. When you are smoking it, 5 years. Now, the unfortunate part of this law is that when you get into the prisons, Indian hemp is sold in our prisons illegally.
So we'll come back to that. We'll come back to you in a short while. Welcome, viewers. This is a discussion on the use of drugs among Africa's youth. I'm hosting Mr. Fred Awa here. He has already explained what we mean by drugs. He's also taken us through some of the impact of drug use. And currently we are discussing the policies. We are trying to find out whether, of course, there are some policies in place, whether there are some authorities who have been established to ensure that these policies are implemented. And just before this overview, Mr. Fred, you were telling us about the sale of drug use, drugs in our prisons.
Absolutely. You know, the sale of drugs in itself is illegal.
Yes, of course.
Are you getting it?
Absolutely.
So when you are caught, the laws apply. You get into prison for a number of years, maximum 10.
Okay.
Now, according...
That is in Ghana?
Absolutely.
Okay.
According to the World Commission on Drug Policies, there are reports that in our own Ghanaian prisons, persons who have been convicted of drug use are in cells and still have access to what? Drugs.
How do they get it?
Well, of course, it surely will be in connivance with some authorities of the prison.
Okay.
Okay. So by and large, it doesn't help the prisoner, one. It doesn't help the prisoner's family, two. It doesn't help the government, three. Why do I say so?
Yes.
If I am a lecturer or a student and I am caught using a drug, I am taken into the hospital. It doesn't stop the fact that I am addicted. I still have what? A craving for it. So by fair or foul means, there are tendencies that I'll still what? Seek to find it.
Okay.
And all over Africa, it looks to me, our prisons, they still peddle such. Okay? At least with the World Commission on Drug Policy being a reference. That document was published only in 2017, just last year.
Which is recent.
Okay. Now, why would you rather not see it as a health issue? Because if, Felicia, we find that you are doing drugs, there are medications that can clean your blood streams.
Okay.
Are you getting it? To at least curb the issue of addiction. So you come back to normal. What has been damaged already is gone. Okay. But the addiction would what?
It will
go.
still be there.
Are we together?
Yes.
So the advocacy that is ongoing now is to decriminalize the use of certain drugs.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you decriminalize productive individuals, take for instance the issue of alcohol. It is not illegal, but people are drinking alcohol. But how many?
But it's not illegal, like you said.
Yeah, it's not illegal.
Yeah.
People are drinking it, but how many people do you see drinking alcohol on the streets and poor? Exceptional cases.
Okay.
Are you getting it? And now let me tell you this. The concept of drug in Africa, sometimes we don't want to talk about it holistically. The reality is that we are being hypocritical about the issue.
How exactly?
Now, Ghana, our own country, Ghana,
Sure.
was rated #1 in the use of drug in the entire of the African region by the World Report on Drugs of the United Nations.
Which year was this?
2007. And that same year, we were rated #3 in the entire world region. It means that people are using cannabis in our country. Are you getting it?
Okay.
Now, that apart, that same report posited that 21.5% of Ghanaians have at least used Indian hemp or a cannabis product one time in their what? Life.
Their life.
So be it legal or illegal,
People are using it. Okay, so now let's bring the discussion to our higher education institutions.
All right.
What can the authorities do, since we find, of course, a large number of youth in our institutions? What can the university authorities do to check the use of drugs in the institutions?
I think a number of measures can be prescribed.
Okay.
#1, the universities should encourage peer clubs. All right? Students coming together to educate themselves about drug and their what? Effects on students.
Okay.
That is one. The university itself can have an orientation what? Program annually or every semester to talk to students about drugs and their effects. University can also invite the National Commission, the National NACOP, National Narcotics Control Board,
yes,
or other NGOs that are into what? curbing drug abuse, to speak to students at intervals. And I am convinced that when these are done, it may not necessarily curb it, but gradually it would minimize the effect of drug usage on our campuses.
Okay. Let's look at another angle of this discussion. So there are the people who use it,
Yes.
which is the youth,
Yes.
who are able to access it.
Yes.
Now there are also the people who actually make it available, the drug traffickers who sell it. What can we do about these people? And are there policies governing, trying to end their trade as well?
Yes, there are policies, and that for those ones, I think Africa has done well with the policies, all right? But implementations of the policies are the issues.
Okay.
For instance, cocaine is not grown, it's not a product of Ghana.
Okay.
It comes through
Of
our
Africa,
borders.
you mean?
It's not a product of Africa.
Okay.
It comes from different borders. The reality is, what border control mechanisms have our governments
Put in place.
There are instances where politicians are even cited as aiding and abating the smuggle of drugs into our countries. So I think that much as we have good policies that are intended to curb these, there is also the need to ensure that there are strict border controls. Okay, yes. And this goes with a genuine immigration service, genuine police force, good political commitment, because border controls cannot be done effectively if immigration officers are compromised.
Is it also possible that when these drug kingpins are caught, the punishments meted out to them are not hard enough, and so they keep on doing that business even though they know they will be caught?
Oh, I don't think, I think it's an array of issues. Now, they are well connected and niched, such that if one is in trouble, it looks as if the whole world is in trouble. So they come to rescue. That is where the integrity of our law enforcement agencies is supposed to be strict. Yes. So I think that is one factor. If not, the laws are clear. There are the Narcotic Control Board, for instance, has laws regulating what should happen to somebody if you bring in some substances, or if you are found cultivating substances that are illegal, like Indian hemp. All right. But I do think that by and large, it is an issue of realizing as Africans that compromising on border controls, compromising on our judicial systems when persons are caught, using political influences negatively will never help us. I think the laws must apply. But for the issue of the users, I do think that there is the need to decriminalize drug use, because it is actually a health issue and not a criminal issue.
So do you think drug use among the youth is preventable? How do we do it if it is?
Well, I think that it can be minimized but preventable. I am not confident of saying yes at this stage. Yeah, it can be minimized in that education is the key. At any given level, if someone has information about a thing, the person does not dare get into it. But if you do not have information, then there are tendencies that you would venture into it. So that is why I do think that there should be the need for an enhanced budget from the governmental level, from the institutional level, with collaborative efforts from civil society organizations and NGOs to educate the young ones, right from basic to the university level, on the consequences of drug use. And this, I am convinced, would minimize the canker in Africa.
Apart from the rules that are established, of course, in every country or every institution, do you think other social structures can support the process of trying to minimize the use of drug, like, say, our parents, our lecturers, other social institutions? Do they have a role to play in the bid to try to eliminate or reduce drug use, like you said?
Yes, that is very true. The reality is that a lot of young people, whilst growing up, take aspirations from their parents, their lecturers, politicians, and other role models. So if you are a parent and then you are into drug use, your child assumes that it's a good thing. So he doesn't see anything wrong with doing it.
Okay.
Okay. If I am a lecturer, for instance, in class, there would be a few who would aspire to be like me.
Okay.
All right? So if my character out of the classroom connotes drugs, there are tendencies that whilst taking the good aspects of me, they would also take what? The negative.
Okay.
So it's a collective venture. Parents, school authorities, politicians, our lives should be such that it reflects anti-drug so that young people can see us as models.
Okay. So I'll give you the next few minutes to really talk to the youth in Africa about the use of drugs. What message do you have for the youth and then, of course, for the authorities as well?
All right. Now, I would want to talk to the authorities and parents first. Now, the issue of drug doesn't come in a 9-day wonder. It's a process. So if all of a sudden you see a young man who hitherto was not wearing drugs and all of a sudden he has the likeness for wearing drugs, there are tendencies that the person is getting into drug use. Number two, if a person was not akin to using syringes and all of a sudden you see that the person likes using syringes and needles, there are tendencies that the person is into heroin use. So there is the need to check that fellow. If all of a sudden one who did not like music at all or loved some other genre of music all of a sudden is seen loving reggae to an extent, an uncontrollable extent, then there are tendencies that the person is into the use of Indian hemp. All right. So these are some of the things you should look out for to know whether a person is getting, if all of a sudden a person who wasn't in that category all of a sudden goes into them, there are tendencies that...
So just to clarify, does it mean the use of reggae necessarily connotes somebody starting to use a particular drug?
Now, you see, reggae music has a history. Okay? It has a history, and traditionally, a lot of persons who do reggae music are persons that are associated with what? Indian hemp. All right. So if you do Indian hemp once, twice, thrice, the ghettos, they don't play gospel. The ghettos, they don't play cools. The ghettos, they don't play any genre of music. It is reggae. Reggae in any of its forms, dancehall, Sika, rocksteady, any of its forms. So if all of a sudden, Felicia, I know you, you like gospel, then all of a sudden I see you dancing to Bob Marley like you do big. Gradually, every time it's just about reggae music. Then there are tendencies. Now, the word is advisedly used. There are tendencies. Just like I talked about the goggles. There are people who wear darks. It is their tradition. But if all of a sudden, Felicia, you don't wear darks and you are a newscaster, your colleagues begin to see you wearing, you don't have eye problems. They begin to see. There are tendencies that you want to disguise the redness that is associated with using Indian hemp.
I like the fact that you are stressing on the tendencies.
Yes.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that once you see this. Okay, so
it's
we'll
like
take
a symptom.
Your message to, we'll take your message to the authorities and then we'll round up with the
Yes, throughout Africa, the youth are expected to carry the vision of the African Union's Vision 2063. And of course, the youth constitute over 60% of the continent's population. Anything that affects the youth affects the entirety of the African continent. And drug is one of the key issues that threatens the accomplishment of the Vision 2063. So I want to appeal to all of my former constituents throughout the continent that drugs do not solve the problems. If you see drugs, go left. If it is on your right, go left. If it's on your left, go right. Drugs have never helped any nation. Thank you.
Drugs have never helped any nation, says Mr. Awa. Well, viewers, this brings us to the end of our discussion on youth and drugs. Thanks for staying tuned, and we look forward to having another engaging session sometime soon. This is AU TV, and I'm your host, Felicia Kwagbeji. Thank you.
All right, see you.